Okay guys, so I've made a few changes since the last video, and the main thing I want to talk about is dependency injection. So let's just go over the changes I made real quick. I'm using Entity Framework as the backing data access method with local DB. So if you take a look at my application DB context, you'll see that I'm referencing the application DB context in the base class DB context constructor, and I'm doing this, which you wouldn't do in a production app. You'd want to add some handling for your tests versus your production app. So what this does is it drops the database and runs any migrations. Drops the database, creates the database, and runs new migrations against it every single time it runs. So in my app config, you'll see I have for the main program, I'm pointing to this database TDD example, and in my example tests, I'm pointing to TDD example tests. So what I did was I moved that unit test we wrote out to an integration test, and I target the to-do item repository. Only this time I'm actually passing in the database context into the constructor. So you can take a quick look at what that's doing. All I'm doing is I'm assigning the context here to a field in the class, and I'm accessing the context directly from the repository. So if we run our tests again, the difference is instead of using an in-memory list, we're using a local DB database. So you can flex any database constraints, you can test anything you should see in your production app here. There is a little extra overhead because we are destroying and standing up a new database every single time we run these. So they all pass. Just so you can see, these are the to-do items that were actually created in this sample database by the tests. So every time we run those tests, we kill the database, recreate it, and run the tests. Integration tests can be very helpful. They have their place. If you write a ton of integration tests, it's going to take a while to run your tests. So let's go up here to the program. So what I'm doing now is I have this configure method. I'm going to call it in our main method here. And what I'd like to do is, we're going to instantiate a new instance of the context that will run for the life of this program. And we'll pass that to our configure method. Now, what I want that configure method to do is I want it to instantiate the repository. So let's go ahead and write a test for that. Actually, this would be a unit test. Program tests. And create a constructor, program tests, okay. So we want to test that the configure method updates the repository and it instantiates it. So let's see, configure sets instantiates to item. Alright. Sorry, a little tired. So we're going to call the configure method. Should be pretty straightforward. Right, static method. So, should have known that. Alright. Shouldn't need a constructor. So our context, pass it to the configure method. And we'll assert that the to-do item repository is not null. Right, so if you ever have any issues with your tests not being found, just do a build. It might help if the tests are public. Right, so test fails because we haven't implemented our method. So and it passes. Pretty straightforward. Nothing new there. But I just want to show you how doing these things and breaking them down into separate methods and having in the back of your mind writing programs that are testable and writing methods that are testable. It helps change the way you write code. So let's say okay, so we're going to deviate a little bit from TDD. There are different ways you could test this kind of stuff out, but since we're working with the console, one way you could do it is to stub out the console methods and implement your own, and then pass in the interface and test against the interface. But basically what I've done is, so we have a configure method that is just going to create the context. It's going to set the context. And we're going to read some input, and we're going to take that input and we want to add it to the context. So we have this add to-do item, new to-do item. So this is where dependency injection comes in. You can use, we'll use a constructor for this one actually, just so you can kind of get the idea. Normally you wouldn't wrap all of these things in one class, but for the sake of the example, that's how we're going to do it. So we'll come back over here to our program tests. We will add a test method, and we want to test that add new to-do item adds to-do item to repository. So we need to pass in a repository for this method to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate our test repository. And from the last example, you know that this is just an in-memory list of to-do items. But because it implements the interface, we can pass it in. And now we're running a unit test, and we're not actually testing against the database right now. You could if you wanted to, but this is just an example of how we can make our methods testable by injecting dependencies via interfaces. Now, I think, yeah, we're going to get a build error because I didn't implement this interface. Let's see. Right. So we need to pass in the to-do item repository in our main method here. Run all our tests. And we'll see that this test method failed, as expected. So let's go implement it. Pretty simple. And let's run our test again. Test passes. So now from our program, we can build the repository. So let's just go ahead and run it. Let's destroy our database first. Okay, hasn't actually been created. And you can see here we're now adding to-do items. So, pretty simple. But that's just another example of how interfaces can be incredibly important when you're running tests. With web APIs, you can actually use constructor injection, so you can pass in an instance of your interface, and when the constructor or when the controller gets called, you can inject your services into the constructor, and you can inject them as interfaces. So then you can write tests directly against your controller, even if your controller is needing to use data or other services that you'd rather not run in your tests. You can just create stubs for them. So then you can mock pretty much anything. I'm going to call it good. Let me know if you guys have any questions.